Welcome everyone to Awesome Truth, a wrestling book club. I'm your host, Steve Semino, and with me as always is my co-host, Walt Schwenk. Hey, Walters.
Hello, Steven. How's it going?
My friends, it is going very well. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome to Awesome Truth. We are here today to return to the written word. We are talking about a book today, Walt. It is not one of the more what's the word I'm looking for? Exciting books, influential books of importance, books that people talk about in terms of wrestling literature. This is a little off the beaten path one. It's written by a legend of wrestling writing, of wrestling in general, but certainly not one of his more well-known tomes. But we covered it anyway, because that's what we do. We read wrestling books, and there's a hook to this, Walt, that I found fascinating. We'll see if you did as well. The book, of course, is called Countdown to Lockdown, a Hardcore Journal, and the author is Mick Foley. Again, have a nice day in our archives. We've talked Foley before. This, though, is Foley at a different point in his career, later, and on a fully different path. And that path, of course, was TNA. That's really what we're here to talk about, I would say, Walt, is TNA.
TNA, our favorite topic that we know so little about.
The thing that I always assume that you know something about, because you have a friend who sort of watched it at some point, but then you always remind me you don't really know very much about it either.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot from a 6-month window, and I couldn't even tell you what years those were. It was sometime after this book was written, so I have no knowledge about anything that was written about this particular moment of Mick Foley's career or TNA's trajectory. So we're kind of just. All of our takes are going to be based on Foley's book solely, not from any expertise on our end.
Or with a lot of hindsight, because obviously where we are now in 2022, TNA is not dead, but this version is long dead. You know, it lives on as Impact in some form, essentially. But what we knew as TNA is long gone, especially the version that was a bunch of old WWE guys getting one last paycheck, extending their careers, in some cases coming in to assume control and run the company into the ground. Like that was an era of TNA that I don't think anybody looks back fondly on, and I would say most people point to as the end of whatever was burgeoning there. And that's not exactly what Mick talks about in his book, but he is, sort of unavoidably part of that sort of run. Like he was old at that point, and he was facing Sting, and he was doing a lot of things. Kurt Angle was there. Like it was a lot. I don't want to say retreads necessarily, but certainly men who were past their prime looking for one last bite at the apple.
I think Foley was kind of one of the first old WWE stars. Not one of the first, I will say, because Angle was clearly and Christian Cage, and there's that wave. But then there was Foley, and then there was everybody else that came in at some point. And then I know there was the Main Event Mafia. I think this was part of that. I'm not sure. So maybe there was the Scott Steiners and the Booker T's that were already there for their run. Unclear. If Foley's run during this book was kind of lumped in with the Hogan Bischoff kind of. I would say Renaissance, but definitely not.
He says at the end, we're jumping ahead, but at the end of the book, he has sort of an epilogue, and it. Well, I want to talk about this in way more detail, but he basically says, very soon after this, my boy Terry and Bish came in, and then they moved to Monday. Is sort of how it's sort of the postscript to the book is we're going toe to toe with WWE. Oh God, that ruined everything, and now the company is falling apart.
We are jumping ahead, but I think it's important to kind of really contextualize what we think this era is about.
Yeah.
From people who did not watch this product very often.
This was in 2009. That was when that's the point of time this book covers. So
right.
A long time ago, as much as I want to say old guys, Sting is literally still wrestling right now in 2022. So Sting of 13 years ago, though certainly not the Sting of, 1992, was still it was not a very old man. He was nearing the point when he should retire, but he wasn't. It's not like he was creaking around the ring. He just was certainly not the Sting that we, from Starrcade '97.
Yeah, I mean, he was champion in 2009 of TNA,
Yeah.
and so was Foley. And what Foley details throughout this entire goddamn book is there's no reason, he had no business being in the ring wrestling anymore. They weren't that old, but at the same time, like Foley was clearly very old, and Sting was. These are the two faces of the company, though. Like, if Sting was the face of AEW, like from with regards to like the championship scene and the title scene, like that would be a difference. That's what we're talking about here. Not,
Yeah, it's very weird to read this book right now. Like, one of the reasons we read this book, Walt, to be totally honest, is it was like $2 on Kindle. So we were like, okay, and it still is $2 on Kindle. So if you're listening to this episode and you want to take a crack at this book, it's very, very reasonably priced. So you will get bang for your buck for sure. You'll get 400 pages for $2. That's a good deal. But it really was. We wanted to see what it was like, in this era of TNA that we didn't really know, and it's even though trying to add the context we're trying to add here, it's wild to look back even 13 years ago and read about Mick Foley. A, saying he shouldn't be wrestling, but B, wondering if him versus Sting was going to pop a good buy rate. And you're like, Mick, come on. Like, it feels very, there's a hint of sadness around this book that I feel like you can't deny, like, I don't want, like, I understand why they all took their jobs there and were trying their best, and they certainly seem like they put a lot of work into it. It wasn't like they were half-assing it, but you can't read this book right now and look back then and be like, oh, what a sweet, time they had. It just feels sort of melancholy and doomed, and there's an aura around it that I think is not even necessarily fun to read about. It's just sort of like, it's like they're yelling at clouds, it's like they're swinging at ghosts. Like they're just never really going to succeed.
The mentality Foley has with regards to all this is like, I got to really nail this promo because to sell this segment 3 weeks leading up to this like big main event that for some reason I'm involved in. And it's just like, we're talking about these like go home shows and like these TV segments and stuff. And it's always interesting to kind of break down like step by step why an angle works or doesn't work. And, that's a lot of these books that is just like kind of taking that deeper dive into the psychology and why. But like, I think to your point, this was kind of like doomed.
Mm-hmm.
And this was kind of like a weird nostalgia grab because like Foley should not have been wrestling for a title in 2009 and he's main eventing and it's like, he's explaining how he's training for comebacks and he just keeps like rupturing discs and from like hack squats or the leg press machine, which is like, this is like pretty basic shit. Like your body is just fucked, man. And so like hearing him talk about this and then it's like, oh, I got to nail this promo to like sell. It's like, guys, we've seen this comebacks before so many times. Even in 2000, like before 2009, we had seen this similar kind of like arc for an older wrestler that should not be wrestling for the title. It's like, we know this kind of ends in kind of a weak ass match.
Yeah.
Like we know that this is like, you can sell it all you want with promos and like psychology, but like you can't fucking do like a back body drop without like losing feeling down both your legs. So what are we doing here?
Yep. And I will say Mick is self-aware too. It's not like he doesn't own up to this and open up about it and admit it. Like he makes it very clear that he knows he can't do certain things, and like you said, that he's trying to compensate in certain ways. Your point, very well taken, that the end, the fireworks factory that we're getting to is going to be a very sad one. Like it's going to be a very milquetoast finale no matter what. But this whole book has the air of someone who just broke up with their long-term girlfriend, or their wife even, and is, now has a new wife and is trying to convince themselves a little bit and convince you a little bit that their wife is just as good and that they're very, very happy and that things are going great, but they can't stop talking about their ex. And in Mick's case, I understand that because his ex is WWE, and he's not gonna not tell Vince stories. And this book has a lot of really good Vince stories. Like, it has a lot of good WWE stories, a lot of good despondent Foley stories, a lot of, you get a lot of insight into what happens when things go wrong, how they treat you on the way out the door. Like, there's a ton of good stuff there. But again, at the same time, this is Mick telling these stories about a company that he no longer works for in a book about the other company he works for, and he can't stop going back and forth and comparing and trying to puff up TNA. And again, it just does not feel legitimate. Like, even if he's rose-colored glasses, super optimistic, believes in this company, giving it his all, wants to do the best, like, he knows where he came from. We know where he came from. And I just do not buy. And I can't imagine even 2009 that a lot of people bought the idea that what Mick is writing about matters, that the company is on the cusp of big success, that WWE is going down. Like, it just does not, I couldn't stop thinking the entire time, like, Mick, like, I know what you're going for here, and do you want like a hug or something? Do you want me to, like, do you want to talk about it? Like, what can I do to help?
I guess the only real interesting takeaway from where I'm sitting is, like, his stories about Vince and commentating and his, like, short-lived career as a color commentator, and just like all the nonsense that comes with it. Like, they paid him like an absurdly low rate for it, but they didn't tell him about it, so he assumed he was getting his normal rate, and it's just like, and then his interaction with Vince, which, as we all know after however many episodes we've done of this show, that those are always going to be the best stories. I don't like how he told some of those stories, because he was trying to kind of skate the line of, like, not revealing what Vince told him and scolded in the ways he scolded Mick during color commentating that led to him just, like, quitting. But then he'd tell it in this weird fairy tale story, which is I can't even do it justice. But, like, he's like, oh, I'm not gonna tell you what he said, but, like, Vince came to the fairy tale castle kingdom of announcer land, and he told Mick he's a poopy head. It's like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, either tell us what he said or don't tell us within this riddle, like, what the actual fuck. Like, so, but ultimately, those are always going to be the best stories. At this point in his career, as Mick Foley, the writer, he has 2 books before this, and we all know that the TNA stuff, to your point, was kind of like the afterglow, the honeymoon phase, whatever you want to call it. So a lot of his stories were kind of just told in rose-colored glasses, or seen in rose-colored glasses. It was just nicer, I guess. But, like, the brutal honesty of the WWE side is only a handful of, like, things you actually want to get into more and hear more of, and then it's, like, done. So it's kind of like, that sucks.
Yeah, there's not a lot of structure to this in that way. Like, we praised John Moxley's book recently, or a few months ago now, for having a lack of structure in sort of an enticing, mirroring his personality type way. Like, Moxley's a little unhinged, the book's a little unhinged, it bounces around, but you get a sense of the guy the entire time, and you enjoy the ride, and it doesn't really matter that you're not going ABC. This book has a lot of structure in the sense that you're going from, you're counting down literally the days until the pay-per-view. So in that sense, it's very rigid. But the way and the times in which he weaves those stories in, there's a whole tangent about Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero, but mostly Chris Benoit, but about, that whole tragedy, which we've covered 8 million times on this podcast. But, Foley drops his own 2 cents. And it was the book that synced up with that event the closest, so I'm sure he felt the desire or the need to comment. But it doesn't fit in this book at all. Like, it's sort of an aside, halfway through. It's like, oh, by the way, here's 20 pages on Chris Benoit. Here's my idea. I wish I had written a book, a fictional book about Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero writing letters to each other, which is the most insane thing I've ever heard. Like, I wish he had written that book so that you and I could read it and talk about it on the podcast. But to want to do that book at that point in time is an absolutely outrageous idea. But there's no rhyme or reason to why it comes up then. It's just time to do that. And, like, it's a long book, too. This is 400-page book, I want to say. 335, like 350. So, like, not nothing. Like, he does not, it's not a tight TNA centric narrative of the build to that match with Sting. It sort of gets unwieldy at times and meandering, and like it's a strange, like I said, it's a strange mix of rigid and all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't even talked about the structure yet, which thank you for kind of talking more about it. But ultimately, it's like the TNA storyline that where we're going into the weeds of this particular story that leads to this title win. That wasn't interesting enough, and that was half the book. What else you got? Well, we got some Vince stories. All right, well, that's pretty good, but that's like 5% of the book. And then you have, that Chris Benoit, like super tangent. I ended up skipping. I'm like, first off, like in 2022, hearing about a hot take on Chris Benoit in 2009 is like, we're a little outdated at this point. So like, I can't even pretend like this is worth my time. And I'm not saying that Mick Foley doesn't have a meaningful take on this tragedy, but like he's going into the science of like concussion. I'm like, this is not like what I'm reading right now. You are not a doctor. You are not a scientist. Like you're just a fucking like wrestler who's been concussed, and you're giving me all this information. I'm like, all right, I'm out. So that's
he does some armchair psychology too, in defining who would enter wrestling, why they would do it, the kind of people they are, the choices they make. Like it's not uninteresting, but yeah, it's not. It's not anything we care about at this point, given all we know. And it is definitely, there's a little bit of told you so. There's a little bit of I know better. Like I know he is an elder statesman, but is he the elder statesman? Like sometimes he acts like his opinions are sacrosanct, like I say this, I've seen this, I know this, so listen to me, old Mick. And I was like, well, that's just your opinion, man. Like, it's an informed one, but I don't know if it's the end all be all.
It just ended up sounding like a rambling, which, not ideal if you're trying to make this like really important point. Anyway, so there is that part of the book, which is like 5%. And so like now where it's like, okay, well, half the book is whatever. And then like the other half is just like this, like, and to his credit, he did preface every like tangential or just like, he had these like side, like these short stories that kind of were in between the longer overarching narrative of the book with the TNA. And it's like, oh, this story has a lot to do with wrestling. It's like, oh, Vince chewing me out on commentary. Like, all right, that's a 10 out of 10 with regards to wrestling stories. Then you get into the self-indulgent tales where it's like, I met a celebrity that I liked in the 80s once, and here are all the times I listened to Tori Amos before matches in the 80s, and then I met her, and she knew me. It's like, dude, who is this story for? It's not for me. It's not for other wrestling fans. I don't know who Tori Amos is anyway, and I like to think I like know something about culture. Like I don't know who this person is. It's like this is literally just the kind of like flex here. I know this celebrity, this like F-list celebrity. This is not for anybody, and it just got those stories became really really annoying because they weren't that interestingly told either.
Yeah, I mean, I understand where you're coming from, and I'm not going to say they're good. I'm not going to say, oh, I had a great time reading 30 pages on Tori Amos.
You should, because it's bad. It's objectively bad.
But I understand. I mean, the point he's trying to make is like, look at, I'm this weird, he's doubling down on like the Foley persona of like, I'm a weird guy. Like you think I'm this big brawler bruiser, but I love Tori Amos and like soft rock and, and like girls on guitars and stuff. Like he's drawing the parallels there, which is whatever. Like, I don't know. I'm all for, like, not every story can be hot goss wrestling, fire, where he's calling people out and sharing grudges. Like, I don't expect every page to be that. I just don't. I fully agree with your point that if you're going to put that in there, it better be really good. There better be an event that occurs that matters. Like it better have some tie into your life in some direct way. It shouldn't just be 30 pages for then a final thing where Tori Amos is like, I know who you are. That is the payoff there is minimal to non-existent, and that negates the previous dozen or so pages almost immediately.
I think there's a revelation that happened. I think you came to a similar revelation from, and mind you, we read this book a while ago, so we were supposed to bank it weeks ago, and then we ended up
we tweeted about it a month or so ago, and then things started happening. People passed away, and we just wanted to do other things, and so here we are back again.
I felt this way rereading Have a Nice Day when we did this 100 episodes ago, and it's just like, I don't think Mick is that funny. His writing starts getting on my nerves because it's like, God, we're coyly trying to tell PG-13 dick jokes. I'm just like, dude, like, what the fuck, man? Like, it almost became insulting after a while. Whereas, like, Have a Nice Day, the content is so good and it's so personal. And it was also the first, like, there's a lot of reasons I would forgive him and his, like, lame Al Snow humor and stuff. But after the third book, it's like, dude, like, can we come up with better material at this point? Like, I thought you tried your hand in comedy. You didn't learn that at this point? No, I'm not trying to be an asshole about it. It's just not funny. Like,
he's really horny too. Like, he's extremely horny. He brings up, and which is fine. Like 13, he's an old guy. Book came out a little while ago. Like, I don't think he's insultingly horny necessarily. I don't think he's objectifying a ton. But there's one part where he talks about Eastbound and Down. Season 1 of Eastbound and Down, which now feels, Danny McBride has done 8 shows in between then. But he talks about April from Eastbound and Down, one scene where she's topless, and he dissects whether she is actually topless or it was stunt boobs. And he talks about it for like 5 pages, like how much he liked the boobs, how much he wanted to see the boobs, how he, was pausing it to figure out if they were, they're identifying marks to define whose boobs they were. And it really is like Mick, like, I get she's a nice looking lady, like, you're a horny old man, like, I see the connection there, but he just brings it up a lot, and that's just one example of many other times where he's going for comedy, he's going for guy humor and boob joke, and it's just, but yeah, it does get grating. It's not witty, it's just sort of relentless, It's like he thinks if he just keeps bringing things up over and over, making references, being Mick, that it'll just charm you by, like, in terms of beating you down until you're unable to resist. Yeah,
to be clear, I'm not offended by the Eastbound Down story because I'm a prude. I'm offended because I consider myself a fan of comedy to some degree, and this is not that.
Yeah, it's fine. He can tell boob stories all day if they're entertaining and enjoyable to read. I'll take them, end over end. But that's not what he's really doing here.
You can't help but not draw parallels. These are I should specify. This is what I see when I read a third iteration of a Mick Foley book. It's like, God, Jericho has 5 of these things, and they're just so much more entertaining. Because he does the same thing too. To be fair, Jericho will talk about the time he meets Metallica or goes backstage at this rocker, that rocker, meets Lemmy, yada yada yada, and, like, for some reason it's just, like, more palatable. And I think the Eastbound and Down anecdote is a great example of why a third Mick Foley book I just, like, grown my way through, and I would gladly read a 6th Chris Jericho book, which might be coming out soon. I think there's another one coming down the pike. But what makes him a great podcaster in many ways too. So, and
I think you'd agree that Jericho has a bunch of dumb jokes too. Like, Jericho has catchphrases that he leans on. He has, he's not. He's funnier than Foley, but it's not too much of a distance between the two. I would say their styles are not so far apart. But Jericho, I think, is a little more self-aware. Like, I think he's a little just, more concise. Like, I think he gets to the point quicker. I think his stories are just better. Like, he's more famous. He interacts with cooler people. That does help when you're telling a story if there's someone interesting on the other end too. Like, I just think, like, because I think Jericho's got a lot of dad humor as well. I think he falls, especially in, like, his later books. But yeah, there's something about him that is, much more effortlessly charming than on Mick's end.
I mean, substitute Tori Amos with Lemmy from Motorhead.
Yeah, as we all
already the story is already infinitely better, just from the characters involved. But yeah, I mean, like, I I'm not saying Jericho is the best writer and is the funny. I'm like laugh out loud, like gripping my sides when he's talking about like, yeah, you're right, like fucking dad humor, like the same way Edge kind of did that.
Yeah, just their own like yeah. Edge and Christian, those three definitely have their own very shared sense of humor. I'd say.
Again, I think the word I would use is palatable, like because there's other elements of the story that are just better, more succinct, whatever that thing is. And in the case of Foley, I just you couldn't have me turn the pages quicker, and not that's not to say that I feel that way on every page like certain other books that I've read, but there were certain times where I'm just like taking out of the moment for choices he made with words or just like the roundaboutness of the story or just like cheap laughs or just like Al Snow jokes. Like, can we stop making fun of this poor Al Snow?
It's 2009, so who even cares about Al Snow anymore? Al Snow is gone. Tough Enough is like pretty much like they're all his whole little run has very much dried up by then.
The bit's done. Like, let's make fun of someone else or let's just move on with the stories.
I'll say though, I think not everyone in the world certainly, but I think a lot of people certainly, if you're famous, I think a lot of people have one book's worth of stories. Like I think like normal people probably could as well if you really drill down. I think a lot of people have interesting lives, and if you really cut to the core of it and find the parts that matter, I think you can write a book about a lot of things. I don't think a lot of people's lives are worth 3 books, like I remember even in reading Jim Ross's book, which we covered on the show, like he at least took the harsh step of stopping his story at the halfway point, obviously so he could tell a second book that wasn't like stretching a tiny part out into a larger narrative. Like he was just like, you'll get the rest in a later book, like, which is probably better for if you're gonna write 2, save your good stuff for then. Don't just pack it all into one and figure the rest out later. I think on Foley's end, one of the things, haven't read all of them, but based on how good Have a Nice Day was and how much of his, the good stuff of his career, the rise, the WWE stuff, like his growth as a wrestler, as a guy, like all those topics have been covered already. Now he's just filling in gaps, and I just don't think that is conducive to a good book almost ever.
Yeah, you don't see JR doing a book solely on a month-long commentating gig in New Japan or
the build to like a random Revolution or All In AEW. Like, not every that just because it's happening and you're involved doesn't mean it's worthy of 350 pages.
I mean, I guess we'll wait to see if we ever do read a second JR book, because like there's plenty of examples of people who just did the book for the quick cash grab. While they're still mid-career, like Bryan Danielson, easily could do a second book. Edge, Batista,
Drew Mack. I mean, we enjoyed Drew Mack's book. I'm not sure if there's gonna be enough meat there for a second.
Well, right, because but like if he wrestles for another 10 years, then yeah. But like Mick Foley should be not doing any more books. I'm sorry. The end. You're done.
I don't think he's going to anymore. I don't think
no.
When you get to the end of this book, which we should talk about, because coming back to it, like there's a lot going on in this book as we're describing. Like it's not just the TNA book, but as we said, the skeleton of it, the overarching narrative is him building to this match with Sting. So when you get to the end, and then there's so many asides, like, is this going to draw a rating? Did this promo match up? Like, little comments here and there where Sting tells Mick, like, that's one of the best promos I've ever heard. And you're like, sorry, Sting, like, not to poke holes, but I really doubt that was the best promo. You've heard some great, you were in a company with Ric Flair for a decade. I really don't think this random Foley promo in 2009 was the best promo you've ever heard. But there's an epilogue at the end where he talks about the aftermath of the event and how well it did and what happens next and Hogan and Bischoff coming in and all this other stuff. And he drops some lines that he's self-aware enough, like, I'm glad he's doing this, but it just calls into question everything, and not in like a jokey way. He says, so I think it's fair to ask if any of this was important at all. I had my doubts, even while writing this book, wondering whether a 4th wrestling memoir was important enough to write, let alone important enough to expect people to read. And then he says, "So maybe this wasn't the best wrestling book in the world." Like, these are all things he writes at the end of his 330-page book. You know, like calling into question its importance, wondering if it needs to be there, wondering if he has enough material for the book. Not only did it have to be written, but did I fill it with enough stuff? Which I think can answer with a pretty definitive no, whether you enjoyed it or not. Like, it's just, if you're doing that, like. It must be a very weird feeling to put it into the world and be openly questioning the book in the book.
Well, spoiler alert, the TNA honeymoon ends, and it ends pretty quickly after he publishes this damn thing. This is his fourth book? I thought it was his third.
He says fourth. I know. I didn't realize that until I read it, but...
What are the two before? There's Hardcore Diaries, there's Have a Nice Day, and then what's the third?
Mick Foley's books include...
He did like a Santa or like a Christmas one, maybe. Like
there is Mankind, Have a Nice Day. It's still weird that it's called Mankind. Foley is Good, and the Hardcore Diaries. Foley is Good.
What the fuck is that one?
Foley is Good, I believe, is the follow-up to Mankind. Because remember there was like Foley is God, and then he was like, no, Foley is Good was like one of the things.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, well, we didn't read it, so I've never read it myself, but it is a book.
What is that?
It's like 532 pages. It came out in 2001.
So that's like from the years of 1999 to 2001?
Apparently.
Well, then when does the other Foley book end? Wait, because we're
going through all this. I'm going to go through it all right now. So
it includes like the Hell in a Cell.
Hardcore Diaries comes out very soon before that. Hardcore Diaries comes out in 2008. According to this. Is that right?
Okay. That makes sense because it would cover, I guess, his Edge match and like maybe a few other things.
I guess. And like the concept of being hardcore. I don't know.
But 500 pages.
The Hardcore Diaries came out in 2007. Sorry, I think that might have been like a second version. Countdown to Lockdown came out in 2010, covers 2009. And then there is a bunch of other random stuff. Yeah, he's
Wait, but time out. His follow-up book, and I don't mean to really harp on this, but I really want to understand. This second book is 500 pages, comes out in 2001, and covers...
And Have a Nice Day came out in 2000. And covers his entire life up to that point.
Yeah, I mean, didn't we cover the...
I don't know.
His title run? That was late 98, right?
So
we're covering a year of his career?
The tagline is, he's back, and you won't believe what he has to say this time.
But it's only like 13 months of content.
So Have a Nice Day. Have a Nice Day is 530 pages. Sorry, but Have a Nice Day is 530 pages long. Foley is Good is a mere 481 pages long.
I'm rounding up to 5 in that case, just so we're clear.
It's really... And again, Countdown to Lockdown is 336 pages long. So
Hardcore Diaries is really doing a lot of heavy lifting because it's covering 2001 to like... And 2001 is when the second book comes out?
Yes, correct.
So you had to have written it.
I assume, well, you know what obviously happened?
A year.
What obviously happened is Have a Nice Day, as we remember as being kids, was like a phenomenon. Like, there had never been a wrestling book like that before. So I'm sure whoever the publishing company was like, Mick, you have to write another book right now. Like,
is it
write
a picture book though? Like, what else was...
I'm looking at it right now. It costs, it's a $6 paperback if you want to buy that.
No, I don't, but... I mean, like, sorry.
I really don't know.
I swear we do research sometimes. But in this case, I'm just like, I can't keep track of.
It's another memoir. It's all I can't find out a ton about it while we're recording, but it is literally called another memoir.
And we're sure, published 2001. What the fuck is this about? It details his career. Okay, oh, Jesus. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, the second book details his career from January 1999 until his retirement in April 2000.
So a year and 3 months?
Yeah, so like 15 months of his life. And there's 400 pages of this?
It sounds like, if you didn't like this book, which I will say, I didn't hate this book.
Okay, well.
Because of what it does, because it covers something that I don't know a lot about. That's genuinely what I liked. Like, I still think it was kind of sad. I still think it's way too meandering. I think it's way too long given the subject matter. But there are parts of it that I did find intriguing. I imagine if you read Foley is Good, you would throw it out the window.
Look, if you're going to do a book detailing like going into the deep dive of like a small time period of your career. Yeah. January 1999, when he was champion, to his quote unquote retirement in 2000 at the main event of WrestleMania. That's a good use. A wrestler kind of like being really introspective and beating out in very fine detail a small period that was like the apex of his career.
A small period. I mean, there must be a chapter for every day. I don't know. How else does he fill those pages?
Yeah, but 1 month at TNA was 30 pages or whatever you said earlier. So like, at least that's stretched out a little bit more.
Well, like, I've never, having not read Foley is good, but knowing what those books were like back then, without the hindsight and without the he worked for WWE at that, but like, I don't know. I wonder how much he even speaks candidly on most things. Like, I wouldn't, I bet the Hardcore Diaries, and from remembering this particular book, it sounds like Hardcore Diaries gets a little more in the weeds. Like, I Foley is good is probably like a victory lap, I really doubt he's uncovering a lot of new ground. Maybe he does, but it would surprise me if that was the case.
This was a victory. The second book had to be a victory lap because it also was number one on New York Times bestseller.
He was victorious, to be fair. I mean, he was allowed to take the lap, I guess, because he did win.
He definitely won, but I don't think this Countdown to Lockdown sniffed anywhere near the top. No,
it was
top 7. I can't remember what he said.
He's really telling you at the end to not even have read. Like, if you opened it and went to the end, you'd be like, "Oh, I don't have to read this," because Mick really doesn't seem to think it's worthwhile. So
I think Kindle is like begging you to read this and hope you come across Foley as God, or good.
Yeah,
is God or good?
It's good.
They're hoping that you realize that Mick Foley has written other better books and you read those instead.
Yeah, the actual New York Times bestsellers. You're like, oh, read these.
Pay more than like $2 for it. That's the whole marketing ploy of giving this book to us for practically nothing.
Yes, I mean I think it's worth $2. I will say that. I'm not mad that I spent $2 on it.
I mean, like, I don't know. I think also too, this podcast doesn't have a budget for books and a wrestling book club podcast, and we have $0 budget for buying books. So this was purely a financial play.
Yeah, we've made not a ton of choices in our over 125 episodes, but certainly a few that were like, well, this is $3. Let's just get this, right? Like, let's knock this one out. So we're not above that.
How bad could it possibly be?
It wasn't 500 pages though. We'll have to give it that. So.
Right. Well, thank God.
I think it's also, you and I have like, we have it's a blessing and a curse. Like, we've read so many wrestling books now, and like, we've read multiple books by multiple people, which I still tell people I do a wrestling book club podcast, and they're like, is there enough wrestling books in the world for that? And really, the next thing I should say is, people have written like 5 wrestling. Mick Foley has 4 memoirs. Like, if you ever wonder if there's enough content, just let that roll around in your head for a second.
Yeah. Jericho and Foley alone would get us to 10 episodes by themselves in just books.
And that's not even counting Foley's novels and children's books too. Like, Foley has, I think, like 7 books, 8 books all told.
Yeah, we're not gonna.
No, but I'm just saying, if we really wanted to.
Oh, no. Did I caught myself there. Are we going to review those?
I don't think so.
Dare we review his Santa Claus novels?
It would probably be... There's one called There's a new one. Did you know that? He did a 5th memoir.
Wait, a new memoir?
It's called Saint Mick, and it's about him becoming Santa Claus.
Is that nonfiction?
I think so. Let's say.
Saint Mick, my journey from hardcore legend is Santa's Jolly Elf.
It must be, yeah. It's only 288 pages, so it certainly is.
It's only 288 pages. Fuck.
I can't tell what this is.
The thing is, though, I'm seeing $9 on the Kindle store. So
it's a wrestling biography. It's a real book.
What does he hang out with Tori Amos again? Do we learn more about
his 5th memoir? That is just, God. I mean, someone's paying him to write it, so bless him for that. He's getting money off it, but that is just too many memoirs.
All right. Well, when hell freezes over, I guess we'll give you our review of Foley is good.
Yeah, or Saint Mick. I'd rather read Saint Mick, I think.
Oof. I don't know. I don't know if I can do that one.
Yeah, it's like I said, the one thing I come back to that I did like is reading about TNA, and especially reading we can't get into this late in the episode, but he talks about the TNA that is not. I guess this is relevant because now when people think about TNA and Impact and what they spawned with like AJ Styles and Samoa and like the people they did put out into the world, even Christian, like they gave certain people a soapbox to be successful and launch their careers. Christopher Daniels, like there was all these matches people talk about from TNA that were fun. This is an emphasis on the TNA that everybody hates. This is the TNA that nobody likes, that was not successful, that ultimately killed itself by going down this path. And it's because they focused on all these guys that were old and somewhat washed up, or at least we'd seen their act before, and didn't develop any new stars. And I feel like that is the legacy of this book from a TNA perspective. As I read it, was a reminder of like why that company died, what they did wrong, and why no one looks back at them particularly fondly.
Yeah, I mean, all you have to do is just examine TNA in 2009 and say, oh, Mick Foley is winning the title in a cage match in the main event, while Samoa Joe, AJ Styles, and Christopher Daniels are all killing themselves in the X division.
Yeah.
It's like something's wrong with this picture.
Yep.
Oh.
And never making it to the top, never getting a shit, not facing Mick Foley in any noticeable way, not facing Sting necessarily, kind of, but never in the way that say AEW seems to be trying to do, where they're trying to mix the old with the new to the best of their abilities, seemingly. There's a way to do it right for long-term growth, and that's not something TNA was ever interested in, and that's why they're basically a shell of their former selves.
Although I will say my one TNA expertise will chime in to correct myself a little bit, is that those three did compete for the title on and off throughout a lot of the years. And they did go back down to the X division certain times for whatever reason, but like they were kind of just, and they being Joe and Daniels and Styles, but like they were truly the icons of that place because they just like filled in any role possible, while the fucking Hulk Hogan's and Eric Bischoff's like played a fantasy booker with whoever the fuck they ended up choosing instead.
Yeah, that sounds right, and that's a shame. It's extremely predictable, and it's a shame. But also, who cares? It doesn't sound like. Based on what this book also, I think, reminded us is this is just it's as you noted on the top, like there's not every wrestling story is a story worth telling. Not every event is one worth chronicling, journal style. Like Bret Hart wrote a whole book that way. We loved it. Bret Hart had a great life. Bret Hart cut a lot of stuff out, I'm sure, because it wasn't interesting. Like, you just can't turn 30 random days. It's honestly like watching what's it called? The WWE Network show that we hate. Which one do we hate? 365? No,
Chronicle.
Chronicle is the one we hate. Because Chronicle just says, here's 26 days in the life of X person. And it's like, that's not a guarantee of good story, though. You can't just do it that way. Like an arbitrary time period with an arbitrary person is just, you can't just decide to put that on TV. Like, something of consequence has to happen.
This wasn't worth chronicling.
No, it was not. As much as I liked it a little more than you, I will not. It's not a treat. There's no way it's a treat. I won't go that far. I promise.
Man, so
yeah.
The treat, it even broke the treat meter. So,
what's the other side of treat? Have we ever figured that out? Like,
you're either a treat or you're not a treat.
Okay, you're just not a treat. Is this the other side? So.
We don't say treat or giant piece of flaming hot shit.
Yeah. Unless we're reading like Beefer's book or Jim Cornette comic or something like that. But,
fair, right? Yeah. Well,
not a treat, but again, $2. So if this conversation somehow inspired you to want to learn more, $2 can buy you a lot worse stuff. So
yes.
So if you want it, it's out there in the world, and so are 8 million other Mick Foley books, apparently. So you can go read those if you're a masochist. Or if you want to hear us talk about other Mick Foley books. We talked about Have a Nice Day in our archives at awesometruth.libsyn.com. You can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher for all of our new episodes. Plus, all the old ones are easily accessible there. We are everywhere podcasts are delivered. And you can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at awesometruthpod. Well, good to talk Foley. Good to get this Foley book out of the way. Good to justify our light expenditure and have a little conversation.
Hey, it didn't break the bank of our limited to no budget. This is purely financial.
As it is for Mick as well, I have to imagine. So maybe we're all on the same page.
He has our $2, I believe. So who's really laughing?
I wonder what his cut is of those $2. I'm sure it's not substantial. So
50 cents. I don't know. I don't know the financials.
No. Well, enjoy our 50 cents, Mick, and hope you all enjoy it as well. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, the truth will set you free.